All opinions expressed on any program are those of the producer and are persons appearing on the program and do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of DCTV. All producers and guests appearing on programs provide information and opinions based on information they consider to be reliable. DCTV does not affirm the completeness and accuracy. All DCTV members agree to adhere to DCTV's Statement of Compliance and are participants in a community medium forum where they're exercising their freedom of speech.
Good evening. I'm your host, Karen Hudis, in this series on the network of global corporate control. Today's program is pre-recorded and continues last week's story about progress in the global currency reset. Thank you to DCTV, to Carmen Stanley, Project Director, to Maurice Jackson, Studio Director, and to Crochet Starnes, Audio and Prompter. As you learned last week, 33 years ago, the head of the World Bank's legal department, Dr. Ibrahim Shihada, hired me as one of his lawyers. Egypt's pharaonic bloodline families direct the banking cartel. At the end of World War II, these families no longer owned any of the world's wealth. José Rizal and Ferdinand Marcos controlled these assets. Ferdinand Marcos had the position of M1, and José Rizal was the superior general of the Society of Jesus. Rizal melted down the gold in Singapore, stamped it with the logo of the Global Debt Facility, and deposited it in the Global Debt Facility for the benefit of humanity. Rizal and Marcos created the World Bank and IMF as a world cooperative so that there could be a peaceful transition and an end to the banking cartel. At the end of the teleprompter, I'll give you the minutes of the meeting where José Rizal made that deposit on the 3rd of January 1949, subject to continuance until 2005. And between 2005 and now, we're just waiting for the bankers to wise up, and they will ultimately wise up because they're not going to get anywhere. In the interim, we're just going to go through loops. We're talking about the statute of limitations, which says that any of the claims for the assets in the global debt facility can't be recognized anymore because it's too late. And that's how we know that there's going to be a peaceful transition. The banking cartel is now dragging its feet until they understand there is nothing to be gained. The Black Nobility has lost. Now, the magic ingredient that is needed to complete the global currency reset is us. By that, I mean that our story needs to be implemented. You can see in the story what happened in the District of Columbia. It was corruption and failure to live up to their real jobs. I'll give you the names of these crooks, for that is what they are, starting with the security personnel in the World Bank. Yesterday afternoon, and that's dated the 3rd of July 2015, Officer E.V. Lascano, badge number 3418, responded to a telephone call from Allied Barton security guards at the World Bank. The security guards are employed by the network of global corporate control, which is a private conglomerate that secretly owns 40% of the assets of the 40,000 companies traded on the world's capital markets, including the Federal Reserve and the rest of the 60 central banks that are part of the Bank for International Settlements. The network of global corporate control is trying to steal the United States monetary gold reserves and the rest of the world's wealth that was placed in a trust called the Global Debt Facility at the end of World War II. And this global debt facility is administered by the World Bank and International Monetary Fund. I'm the lawyer for the global debt facility. The network of global corporate control is in receivership in the global debt facility. Allied Barton is part of the corruption that's trying to bring down the entire United States through crashing the Federal Reserve notes that are issued by the private bankers as our currency. Any president that tried to replace the unconstitutional currency was assassinated, Lincoln, J.F. Kennedy, or shot, Ronald Reagan. I've already reported to the Board of Ethics and Government Accountability and to the D.C. Council that the District of Columbia is going to lose its largest employer if it doesn't respect the authority of the Board of Governors of the World Bank and International Monetary Fund that run the Bretton Woods institutions. The Board of Governors has reinstated me as acting general counsel of the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development. The IBRD is the oldest of the World Bank's 5 agencies. When I informed Officer Lascano that I've placed this matter squarely before the Civilian Complaint Review Board established under D.C. Code 51107A in 2005, the Board of Ethics and Governance and the D.C. Council, Allied Barton deliberately lied to Officer Lascano and said that there was a valid barring notice. There can be no valid barring notice unless it's signed by the Board of Governors that run the World Bank and IMF. Allied Barton illegally refused to admit me on Tuesday at the request of one of the executive directors and the World Bank Retirees Association. And I reminded Allied Barton that their refusal to admit me was illegal. I'm copying Allied Barton, whose security personnel are instructed that they have no authority to prevent me from entering the World Bank buildings. The president of the World Bank and the personnel of the World Bank are subordinate to the authority of the Board of Executive Directors. I simply hand-delivered to Allied Barton's security guards an envelope addressed to Allied Barton containing a hard copy of my email informing Ms. Gardner that Allied Barton had no authority to refuse to admit me to the World Bank headquarters building. Allied Barton's security guard on duty at the garage entrance asked me to deliver the envelope to the front of the building, which I did. The guard accepted the envelope, and then I walked half a block down Pennsylvania Avenue. The Allied Barton security guard started shouting at me, and I had to take back the envelope when I refused to do that. An Allied Barton security guard then ran after me and put the envelope into my purse. I returned it to the main entrance, and when Allied Barton refused to take back the envelope, I put it on the sidewalk in front of the door. Several people who exited the headquarters picked up the envelope, and Allied Barton shouted to them to leave the envelope lying where it was. Then Allied Barton called the D.C. police, and I sat on the bench outside the entrance waiting for the D.C. police. When Allied Barton couldn't produce a barring notice, Officer Lascano handed me a slip of paper on which Allied Barton wrote the address of their offices in Alexandria, Virginia. I then sent the following email to Allied Barton, following up with hard copies, and you can see what I wrote in the email. It's probably better to read this at your leisure. But the bottom line is that they're playing games. All of the assets are under our control. And that's what I've told them. And you can see in the paperwork that this is just, it's pathetic, actually, that these crooks are thinking that they're getting away with anything. They're not. They're just showing themselves as totally inept and incompetent. And I've said already that the bankers are in receivership. They have no assets. The assets are with us. And then I signed that. And then there was further correspondence in 2015 to the D.C. authorities, and they're playing games. One of the people, Officer Lescano, is now he's a senior official in the District of Columbia Bar, and this is not to his credit whatsoever. He's a shyster, and most of the legal profession are shysters. They've just they think that their job is to service the banking cartel, and it's not. And Mr. Spagnoletti suggested that I submit a formal complaint to the Board of Ethics and Government Accountability about Commander Melvin Gresham. He's one of the police officers who was fired, and he's had a series of successors. These are all, they're working for the banking cartel. They're not authorities in any way, shape, or form. The global debt facility is not subject to the jurisdiction of the courts, and my complaint of corruption is certainly not going to be subject to any adjudicatory process by BIGA, and my confidence in the rest of the District of Columbia government has been shaken by a sad history of corruption. And I've documented this. Board of Ethics and Government Accountability. Those are misnomers. It's illegal for the District of Columbia Police to prevent me from doing my job at the World Bank and IMF headquarters. And that job is to return the world's gold in the global debt facility to the world's people. I'm going to show you some other assets in the teleprompter to try and bring you current. Then I'm going to try to bridge the disconnect between reality and the current corruption in our world. In last week's segment, we saw how it is the suffering and pain caused by this corruption that's holding us back. I'm a strong person, and I'm tolerant as well. I have fared better than many people in my battle with world corruption. I do have many battle scars. The documents in this couldn't be linked using Amazon Web Services. What was the Black Nobility and Banking Cartel trying to hide from you? They were trying to hide the gold that doesn't belong to the Black Nobility. In the Scrib website, you can see screenshots of what the banking cartel was hiding. And I called that censorship on how we're ending the corruption in the world's currencies in a global currency reset. The corrupted global system is in its death throes. If I'm okay, then you know that humanity retains control of the world's wealth in the global debt facility, as José Rizal and Ferdinand Marcos intended. And that's actually what's going to happen. We're just going to continue to document what's coming to us. And at some point, the Black Nobility is going to realize that they're not getting anywhere. They're certainly not. The only place they're getting is, of the corruption is in plain sight, isn't it? And there are people who, they like to drill down and see what some of the historic fights have been about. These fights are just there like a theater, like a stage. They're there to keep people preoccupied and what we call divide and conquer. There are any number of theaters. One of the main theaters is in the Middle East, where people have been fighting over the same piece of real estate for thousands of years. But there's no reason to fight, really, because these problems are ultimately going to be resolved by the parties themselves. And the best way for these problems to be resolved, first of all, is to get rid of the corruption in the world's money, because that perpetuates all of the difficulties. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't real differences in real estate. Of course there are. But all of these problems are susceptible of resolution, even the problems in the Middle East. But they're not going to be resolved until we get rid of the corruption in the world's money. And the way to do this is just, it's really not, it's very basic. You take the world's gold and you use that as the currency, and you exchange the paper currency that's issued by the Banking Cartel, and you exchange it for the embedded gold, and you do that in a way that that there isn't a huge accumulation of capital. And this is actually going to be a contentious issue, because we're going to limit the amount of currency that's going to go to any one person. And how we're going to do that, that's going to be up to the people in the individual countries. And then we're just going to, we're not going to be giving income to the bankers when they don't deserve it, because they don't owe anything. I'm sorry, we don't owe anything. It's the bankers that owe all this money. And the way they owe it, again, this Federal Reserve bonds that were issued by the Black Nobility, and they traded their gold for bonds. And then José Rizal started to represent them, and those bonds all came into the global debt facility, and then they accumulated interest, which kept on compounding, and that's how you got up to $2 quadrillion. And this debt, these bonds, are now, they're secured by the Federal Reserve banks. 11 states, the secretaries of state, have issued the financing statements, and so that debt is it's secured, and it's been secured now since 2015, and it's not going away. Now, José White in Illinois seemed to think that he could invalidate the UCC statements. That's the financing statements, which evidences all of the debt. And we have the statute that says that José White has a right to renounce that secured debt. That's been, the correspondence has been already cleared by all of the people that represent the I'm sorry, their ministers of finance, and so there's no, they haven't. Jesse White has not invalidated those liens, and he's also been bankrupted, and so has Christine Lagarde, as so has Jim Kim, and their property is now they're bankrupted. They have no property, and that's what's going to happen. We're going to enforce that ultimately. They're just going to be totally ridiculous, and they're not going to make much headway, are they? No, they're not. So where do we stand? Well, I'm sure people don't really want to go into the details of all this debt. It's the details are there. You can see them, but you really don't have to waste your time on it, because the proof that any of these bankers would try to show, it's no longer relevant, because that's what you say in the statute of limitations. It's too old. They don't have any more way to prove that they're entitled to anything. So that was actually the genius of Ferdinand Marcos and José Rizal, to put the assets in sequestration behind the statute of limitations. And so now we know that's the case, and you really don't have to trouble yourself. Now I've given you detailed correspondence, so you can see what kinds of claims people have been making through the years, but it's not going to do them any good. It's really irrelevant by now. So we're at peace. Some people want to delve into the conflicts. And for example, if you go back and see how many people have been harmed, there's a lot of reason why people would feel that it makes sense for there to be punishment, but you're not going to really do anything other than punish yourself, because we won't be able to move on peacefully in a world which we're able to fashion the way we want. That's the bottom line. We just, if we want to live in a peaceful world, we have got to put this behind us, because there's no reason why we should remain at conflict and in war. There really isn't. Now, there are any number of theaters where people have historically found ways of, we call it divide and conquer. The Middle East is one series where the bankers were hoping to foment unrest. There are other places. In the years that I've been the overseas mandate trustee, there are any number of conflicts that people have thought was a good way to spend our time, to delve into all of this. But I frankly, I'm not all that interested in doing that. We can give you these stories so that you know what has happened, but that's not going to convince anyone anymore. And there are any number of lessons to be learned, and we should learn them. And I guess the biggest lesson to learn is that we're actually much more than we know it. And by that, I say that we're transcendent beings. We're connected to the universe, and we're part of a very beautiful world. The fact that there are people on the other side, the Banking Cartel, and they've lined themselves up to try to lord it over us. Well, if you know anything about martial arts, you know that this is not going to net anybody anything. That's one of the things, one of the reasons I think that people may have wanted me to be the overseer mandate trustee, because I really am not going to be intimidated by any martial arts. I'm going to do something called parry repost, which is that anytime somebody comes at me, I'm going to give it back to them exactly in the same measure. So, as I said, we don't want to get bogged down, but if we have to get bogged down, we will get bogged down. We're certainly not going to relinquish our assets that belong to us. Now, we have to make sense of our reality in our world. We're in transition, which is to say that there are many things that aren't the way we thought they were. One of the things that remains is the value and worth that we have, and human beings who care for each other. When we hold fast to this, we know that things will be all right.